A-box. Up. Back to the holster.
Hey, ZombieTactics coming at you again today. More material from my trip down to the desert, Pahrump, Nevada, where it was ridiculously hot. I'll talk about that some more in a second. Like I said, lots of material. This time we'll talk about my actual purpose to driving down to the desert. You know, like, what is it, 400 miles one way? I went down there because I was invited to attend a class by a company called 10X Defense, and they were putting on a version of something called combat focused shooting, and a one-day, I don't know what to call it, an introduction, an overview, that kind of thing, to combat focused shooting. It was put on by 10X Defense, as I said. There'll be tons of links in the video notes here, so you know how to check all these companies out. 10X Defense is associated with Rob Pincus's ICE training company and combat focused shooting. The course was taught by Jeff Varner of 10X Defense and Matt DeVito from another Rob Pincus CFS associated company called Downrange Firearms Training, all the way from Massachusetts, came out to help and assist in teaching this class. So what the heck was this all about? Well, combat focused shooting is kind of interesting, and I have to kind of give a little proviso or caveat or something coming from the beginning here, because it was made clear going into this that this wasn't the ordinary CFS class in some ways. We were going to get an introduction and kind of an overview, a one-day version of the class, but it would be heavily modified for the group of people who were in the class. And that's because, well, this class might ordinarily be attended by people who have very little or no firearms training. Everybody in this class was law enforcement, competition shooters, instructors from other companies, people from local I don't know, organizations, gun companies, things like that in the Nevada area. I mentioned, of course, Jim Fuller from Rifle Dynamics in the previous video. That was one of the things, was one of the people that were invited to this class as well. So we kind of all knew our way around guns somewhat. There wasn't going to be a lot of material spent on things like, you know, sight picture, stance, grip, you know, trigger, all that kind of stuff. Kind of everybody there pretty much knew how to shoot, so we're not going to do all of that kind of stuff. But what we did get is kind of a compressed, good overview of what the combat focused shooting system is all about, if I can call it a system, the method. Combat focused shooting is a set of principles and systems and techniques devised and developed by Rob Pincus based upon what the heck happens to you in what Rob refers to as a dynamic critical incident. Now, I get a little bit of a chuckle in my voice whenever I say dynamic critical incident, because it's a little bit jargony. Okay, I wonder why you don't just say fight, but you think about it a little bit, and it's not as silly as it thinks. You know, what happens if you're getting mugged, you're getting attacked, somebody's trying to rape you, somebody's trying to beat you over the head and take your money, somebody's grabbing your kid and trying to kidnap them, you're at the mall and you hear shots down at the other end. Well, what's going on with that? Well, it's certainly dynamic, meaning you're in the middle of something that is an evolving situation. It's not defined. It's going to happen as it happens. You need to react to what's happening. It's critical, meaning you got to do something about it, and you got to do something right now, and it might have to do with a threat to your life or someone else's life. You could get killed in this. And, well, of course, it's an incident. It's a dynamic critical incident. And, again, that's a little jargony, but there's not really a problem with that term. It aptly describes what we're talking about. Well, what does happen in a dynamic critical incident? You know, the same thing that happens when you've got your head in something that you're working on and your wife or your girlfriend comes up behind you and goes, "Hey, honey!" Ah! You do this. You flinch. You have that fear response. You know, everything like that happens. The dog barks. And you have that natural response. And that is the reality of it, that if you do happen to find yourself in the middle of this kind of fight for your life, this dynamic critical incident, it's not going to happen with any kind of warning. You're not going to the mall saying, "Oh, I'm going to the mall because I know there are terrorists there today." It's going to be you're at the mall and all of a sudden something's happening. And so you're going to have that body alarm response, that flinch response, all of that kind of thing. And combat focused shooting is based upon the idea that you need to work with what your body's doing. A lot of training is based upon running through techniques, ideas, manipulations and things like that that are pretty easy to train for if nothing else is going on and you expect everything is working perfectly. So a perfect grip, a perfect stance, perfect sight alignment, perfect sight picture, all of that kind of stuff. That perfect squeeze with a surprise break, that's all really great. You can get that on a square range on a sunny day just perfect. But if you're, at McDonald's one day and somebody breaks in and, busts in the door and starts shooting, that's going to be a whole different thing. You've got your mind on something else, and your first reaction is going to be kind of like that, oh crap thing, So let's work with that. And the second thing that combat focus shooting system is kind of worked around is the idea that in the middle of an incident like this, one of the most important things for you to do is actually survive. It might not be necessarily about just shooting. It might be about you moving and getting the heck out of the way of whatever's happening. So a lot of movement built into this course from the very beginning, a lot more movement that I've seen in any course that's sort of a beginning handgun course or a beginning pistol course. Now some of that may have been, of course, because all of us there were experienced shooters and they knew they could run the course ahead a little bit like that. But I get the impression that even in the way that they teach this ordinarily, that's a strong component and that movement is worked in from the very beginning. It's not something like you start on the second day or you start halfway through the day or something like that. No, from the very beginning we're working with that flinch response and we're working with that movement to make sure that the way we're training, the way we're getting our mind and our body working together, and the kind of things that we're ingraining and that we're imprinting on our, machinery are the approximations of what roughly might happen should we have to employ these skills. So that makes perfect sense. The other thing that was very interesting about this material in this class was the exercises were designed around the typical kinds of distances that you may have to engage a threat, meaning those kinds of distances where you're getting mugged, somebody's trying to stab you, somebody's trying to grab you or your child or something like that. Those are conversational distances. Those are not headshots at 100 yards or headshots at 50 yards. Because if somebody's 100 yards away and they say, "I want your money," you run. That's your response. There's not a gun response there. So usually we're working within that kind of a 7 to 10, maybe 15 at the outside range, because that's when somebody's coming at you with a gun and saying, "Hey, give me your money." And a lot of the material was based upon dealing with some things that you might learn in other firearms classes and how that doesn't necessarily apply as well to these kind of very typical situations. One of my favorite exercises was one where we worked on our speed. You'd call it a balance of speed and precision drill, I suppose. That's the terminology that Rob Pincus uses to describe it. And it was to show us that at those kinds of distances, a lot of the traditional kinds of ideas about marksmanship having to do with a pistol, at those ranges they don't make a difference. And you'll see here, I'll roll in a exercise here with, I'm sure I've got footage of somebody doing this, where we've got 3 circles on the target, and we're going to shoot that target first, kind of doing a 1, 2, 3, 4, just as really slow, and we're close so we can get a nice little clover leaf or a nice little group there. And then we're going to speed it up for the second circle in the middle, and we're going to kind of do a 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5. And then the third group, we're just going to blaze away as fast as we can. And it's amazing because at those distances, there's very little variation, even though the groups are opening up. There's very, very little variation at those distances in where those rounds are going to go. Well, what does that teach you? That teaches you that you can shoot a lot faster than maybe you've been taught in other classes where you're standing 25 yards away from a target and you're doing that failure drill to the body, one to the head thing. Something you need to get in your head. Some of the other exercises were based on trying to mess with you psychologically while you're trying to have to identify a target and identify whether or not to shoot. I'll roll in something here called a figure 8 drill. You may have seen a figure 8 drill before. I've run figure 8 drills before, and most of them are far less complicated than this, meaning that the target, somebody calls out a color or a name or a shape or something like that, and it's really, really obvious what you're supposed to be shooting. This drill, you're turning around, they call out the number 4, and it's like, first of all, you don't know where 4 is. Second of all, is there 1 4 or 2 4 or 3 4s? Meaning there's 3 threats, there's 2 threats, there's 1 threat. Maybe they're going to call out a number that's not up on there at all. So you've got to turn around, face the potential threat, figure out what's going on, and then if it calls for you to go to guns, do it, and identify every single one of the things that you're supposed to be shooting based upon how they identify it. I said, I've done versions of this before, but not so much ambiguity, if you want to say that much, in it. So this is very good material to kind of get you used to the way you might be rattled in a situation like that and keep you thinking, keep you kind of primed to think about the right things instead of immediately going to guns. We'll identify the threat first in very ambiguous situations. Overall, the quality of instruction by Jeff Varner and Matt DeVito, excellent. I would say that these are both very personable guys, very straightforward, very great conversational, friendly kind of style of teaching. The kind of guy you wouldn't mind spending time having a beer with or that kind of thing, but at the same time pushing you to some kind of standard of excellence beyond what you may have had with this kind of material before going into the class. If this is any example of the kind of thing that goes on at 10X Defense or at downrange firearms training, 10X being mostly in Southern California, although I'm sure they travel all over, or downrange firearms training being back in Massachusetts, that kind of thing, I wouldn't hesitate to recommend either of these companies, and specifically Jeff Varner and Matt DeVito, to for you to attend a class that they teach, particularly this kind of combat-focused shooting class. That's really all I have to say about this. Good class, worked some really good skills, had a good time out there with some good people, and worked it really hard in some ridiculous heat, which I think added stress and a measure of difficulty the entire exercise that we all experienced fully. That's Zombie Tactics for tonight, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.